What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Just a fun episode for you today. Nothing too serious. There was no news, no notes, no major updates. But what I wanted to do is take a look at the NFC North and try to put together the best team possible from the players that were on each of the four teams just this past season. If they're a free agent in 2023, it's fine. We're still counting it. I'm not trying to pick the best players from 2022 per se. I'm not just saying like, all right, these were the three best quarterbacks, so those are my three guys. I'm looking at this sort of holistically. If I had to put together the best possible 53-man roster, considering current talent, how they played last year, age, injury history, all of those sort of things, not just for this season, but for the long term, trying to sort of have my cake and eat it too, where I can build a team that's super successful right now and can win right now, but also looking at the future. I want to build a really good offense, defense, and special teams. What is the best 53-man roster I can build in the NFC North? And the reason I like doing that is to see, all right, how many Green Bay Packers actually made that list and where do they rank in comparison to the Vikings, the Bears, and the Lions? So before I get started, put your guesses in. Who do you think is going to have the most players, the least players, etc.? And we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's start right away. And one that I think was honestly really, really difficult, the quarterback position, right? I initially had two quarterbacks on my list, and I eventually put three on the list. You can make a very strong argument that Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, and Jared Goff all on a team together. And I should note, I'm not taking salary cap into consideration here. Obviously, if you're going to put this team together, you're going to be well over the salary cap. But if you're looking at those three players, you can argue that those three are fairly redundant, that you don't need three drop back pocket passers. They're all, I think Goff's over 30 at this point. Cousins is up there in age. Rodgers is about to turn 40. Why do you need multiples of that player, especially when Justin Fields is going to bring something different to the table? He's your better developmental player. So spoiler, Justin Fields on the roster. I did end up taking both Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins. I was going to keep just Rodgers and Fields because I felt like that gave me Aaron Rodgers now. He's, still, potentially has the ability to play at an MVP level. If I had to play a season out, I'm probably still taking Rodgers, and then Fields would have been my backup. He brings something different to the table. He brings a different level of athleticism. He's your long-term play as well. So that was my initial take. As I got to the end of things and realized I still had a couple roster spots to play with, I'm going to take Kirk Cousins too. Why not take the depth at quarterback in case somebody would get hurt? And if I were only to keep Rodgers and Fields, you could make a strong argument. In fact, you could make a pretty strong argument that the two best quarterbacks last year were Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff in the division. Like, you could make a legitimate argument. Now, I'm not saying they're the two best quarterbacks. That's not what I'm saying. That's why I took Rodgers and Fields. But if you're a Minnesota fan, if you're a Detroit fan, you could make a strong argument like you're really going to keep Cousins and Goff off. So listen, this is a very difficult decision. You could also argue that, like, all right, if you're going to keep three quarterbacks, give me Rodgers, the MVP, the four-time MVP right now, and then give me Justin Fields and Jordan Love as my three. That way I've got Rodgers as my guy now. I've got Justin Fields up and coming, and I still have a lottery ticket as a number three quarterback in Jordan Love. If you wanted to go in that direction, I wouldn't hate that decision either. So there's five quarterbacks here, and quite honestly, keep any of the three that you want. I don't think that there's if you kept Goff, Love, and Fields, I would question you, right? Like, you probably need either Cousins or Rodgers on that team. But outside of that, like, you could make strong arguments in either direction. You could argue like Goff over Cousins when it comes to age and how he played last year. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you, but I went Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, and Justin Fields as my three, and then Goff and Love just sort of missed the cut in this scenario. So Rodgers, Cousins, and Fields, my three quarterbacks. My three running backs: Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, and DeAndre Swift. Now, four other running backs in the conversation here: Khalil Herbert from the Bears, who really came on strong at the end of last year; David Montgomery for the Bears; Jamal Williams for the Lions, who had an incredible year; and A.J. Dillon for the Packers. To me, Dillon's probably the bottom of that list. Montgomery's getting a little bit up there. I like Herbert and Jamal. Jamal is such a unique back. I really wanted to keep him on. But at the end of the day, if you have Dalvin Cook and Aaron Jones and DeAndre Swift on your roster, do you really need to roster a fourth running back at that point? Like, you're not taking any of those guys really off the field. If you're going to take carries away from Cook, you're probably giving it to Jones or Swift. And like I said, you just don't need a fourth running back. Those three can do a little bit of everything. You could argue having that red zone short yardage back in either a Jamal Williams or an AJ Dillon could come in handy. Even a David Montgomery, like, you could argue all of it. And I certainly would understand that. I just think if you could give me Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, I feel pretty good about my chances. Jamal's his ability to blitz pick up, catch out of the backfield, and be a power runner. We know what he can do in the red zone. He's a very, very strong argument here. And if you want to keep him on your team, I have no issues with it. If you want to take like a DeAndre Swift off and put him on, I could understand it because Swift is sort of, redundant to what you have in Jones and Cook as well. But I'm going to take the three most talented running backs in this situation. I'm going to go Cook, Aaron Jones, and DeAndre Swift. Wide receiver, also a bit of an interesting one. Two players I left off of my list, Adam Thielen and Chase Claypool. Those were the next two guys that you certainly have to consider, at least when you're putting a six-man wide receiver group together. Romeo Doubs would be an interesting one as a developmental long play, but just didn't make the cut here. My six, Justin Jefferson, obviously. Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously. And then two rookies, Christian Watson and Jameson Williams. Watson to me is a no-brainer. Jameson Williams is just far too much upside to ignore as like a number 5-6 receiver. Darnell Mooney easily makes the cut in my opinion. And then number 6 is where it gets interesting. You could again go with Adam Thielen. You could go with Chase Claypool. You could go with Romeo Doubs. But look at this group so far. You've got Justin Jefferson. You've got Amon-Ra St. Brown. You've got Christian Watson, who's a good blocker, but Darnell Mooney, Jameson Williams. Outside of Watson, not a great blocking group, not a big physical over the middle type of group. I'm taking Allen Lazard. And it's not because I think he's the best. It's not because I necessarily think that he's better than Claypool or Thielen. I just think you could make a strong argument Claypool versus Allen Lazard here. And if you want to keep Claypool over Lazard, again, no issues. I just think a little bit more of a veteran. If you actually look at their seasons last year, Lazard played a little bit better. I think he does more of the dirty work than Chase Claypool does and works over the middle a little bit better than Chase Claypool does. I just think he gives you a different flavor, and I think you kind of need that flavor in your wide receiver group as well. So Lazard, Thielen, Claypool, you could make the argument for any of the three. But based on what the other receivers brought to the table and what I kind of wanted is something different, in this case, I went with Allen Lazard. So Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Christian Watson, Darnell Mooney, Jameson Williams, and Allen Lazard. Tight end was probably the easiest position to go through. Tight end and probably defensive line. TJ Hawkinson for the Vikings, Cole Kmet for the Bears, Mercedes Lewis for the Packers. I get a little bit of everything. I get my overall tight end in Hawkinson who can do a little bit of everything and do a little bit of everything pretty darn well. I get my blocking tight end in Mercedes Lewis. I get more of a receiving tight end in Cole Kmet, or at least a backup to Hawkinson who can kind of do a little bit of everything. There's nobody else in the division that really makes any sort of sense in that situation. If you wanted to bring more of a, an H-back type player, you could go DeGuara. If you want somebody with upside that just hasn't really played a ton or at a high level, you could go Irv Smith Jr. You could go in a couple directions, but to me, this was really easy. Hawkinson, Kmet, and Mercedes Lewis. Offensive tackle was a bit more difficult, and I ended up keeping 6, partially because at least one of these guys has a little bit of versatility, but I had the roster spots to play with, and I just think all 6 of these guys are very deserving. I'm going David Bakhtiari and Christian Darrisaw and Penei Sewell. Like, you could start any of those 3. Brian O'Neill is more than deserving as a starting offensive tackle as well. So Bakhtiari, Darrisaw, Sewell, and O'Neill were no-brainers. Braxton Jones for the Bears had a really nice year. He's super young, still developmental. I just couldn't pass him up either. And then I'm going with Zach Tom. Tom can play center. Tom can play guard. He gives me a ton of versatility. And I just saw enough upside where I'm just like, I want that guy on my team as like my 10th, 11th offensive lineman, whatever it is. I want that versatility on my team, and I'm not passing up Zach Tom. Taylor Decker for the Lions, a really hard player to pass up here, but he's sort of counterproductive to Brian O'Neill, Sewell, Darrisaw, and Bakhtiari, who I already have on my team, and Jones and Zach Tom give me 2 players down the road, along with Penei Sewell, really Darrisaw as well. This is just a really strong group of offensive tackles. So Taylor Decker just misses the cut. At guard, I've got Tevin Jenkins from the Bears, Ezra Cleveland from the Vikings, not in order, Elton Jenkins for the Packers, and then Jonah Jackson from the Lions as well. So you get, one from each team here? Jenkins is probably a starter. You could maybe even look at putting a Penei Sewell inside if you want to start Darrisaw and Bakhtiari, but Tevin Jenkins, Ezra Cleveland, great options, as is Jonah Jackson, but Elton Jenkins probably 1A in that group. So Jenkins, Cleveland, Jenkins, so 2 Jenkins, Tevin Jenkins, Elton Jenkins, Ezra Cleveland, and Jonah Jackson. And then center, I only kept 1, Frank Ragnow, partially because I know Elton Jenkins could kick inside to center. I also know Zach Tom could kick inside to center. So I do have some depth there, even though Frank Ragnow is the only true center that actually played center this past season. So offensive line, once again, Bakhtiari, Darrisaw, Sewell, O'Neal, Braxton Jones, and then Zach Tom, Tevin Jenkins, Ezra Cleveland, Elton Jenkins, Jonah Jackson, and Frank Ragnow. That brings me to the defensive line. I only kept 4 defensive linemen. It's a really shallow group if you look through this division, and even a couple of these you're not like Pro Bowl players. So you get Kenny Clark and Dalvin Tomlinson. That is a really good spot to start. Those are 2 phenomenal interior defensive linemen. Harrison Phillips from the Vikings is my number 3, and then I'm keeping Devontae Wyatt. I'm just going upside here. And I'm going to, take the guy that was just selected in the first round. We know he's a physical freak. And I think the reason I'm a little bit okay only keeping 4 and taking Devontae Wyatt as my number 4 is I'm going to have a couple guys on the edge position that can kick inside and play some defensive line that are probably going to play a decent amount inside as well. So Clark, Tomlinson, Phillips, and Wyatt were my 4 defensive linemen. On the edge, Zadarius Smith, who can also kick inside when needed. Danielle Hunter, who can kick inside a little bit when needed. Rashawn Gary, we've seen him kick inside. Aiden Hutchinson can kick inside. And then James Houston. James Houston is an interesting one. I think he played he played 140 snaps last year. And it's not like he was a 6th-round selection, right? So this is not a player that, you would maybe put in this group. I went with the upside here. Do you really need Preston Smith to go along with Zadarius, Danielle Hunter, Rashawn Gary, and Aiden Hutchinson? If you want to put Preston on, that's fine. If you want to go Enigbare instead of Houston, that's fine too. Enigbare played more snaps. Houston was better in his limited snaps, but I just like the upside for Houston a little bit more. I think when he did start getting in games for Detroit, he was pretty darn productive and disruptive. And I'm taking the flyer there with James Houston. So Zadarius Smith, Danielle Hunter, Rashawn Gary, Aiden Hutchinson, and James Houston are my edge players. That brings me to linebacker, which to me, without question, is by far and away the weakest position in the NFC North. This is not a great group, and I don't feel awesome about these decisions. Eric Kendricks, who's coming off probably a down year for him. Devondre Campbell, who's coming off a down year. I'm going to take Quay Walker, the 1st-round pick, as somebody who I'm hoping can develop. I'm going to take Malcolm Rodriguez, the rookie for the Lions from this past season. And then Jack Sanborn from the Bears, undrafted free agent, who had some pretty darn good games at the end of the year last year for the Chicago Bears. Partially is part of the reasons I went with these 5 is because there's just not much depth at that position. Could go with Hicks from the Vikings. That certainly would make some sense as well. But I probably have my starters in Campbell and Kendricks, right? And Quay Walker can probably get in that conversation as well. But I feel like Quay Walker is the high upside play, 1st-round pick, and can also, if he's not your starter, would probably be an absolute special teams demon. And then Malcolm Rodriguez and Jack Sanborn would be 2 of my key special teams players, and they will be, machines on special teams. So I'm cool with that group overall, but not a great overall inside linebacker group. Cornerback, I'm going Jair Alexander, Jalen Johnson from the Bears, Patrick Peterson from the Vikings, Rasul Douglas from the Packers. I'm going Keyshawn Nixon in large part due to kick return ability, and then Kyler Gordon from the Bears. So a little bit of a lackluster group, or at least a group that doesn't have a ton of upside. Jair Alexander, all-pro corner, no question there. I really like Jalen Johnson. Patrick Peterson reaching the downside of his career, but he'd be a really nice fit in your nickel corner position. You've got Rasul Douglas, who can come in and play some man-to-man if you needed. Keyshawn Nixon as your slot, or backup slot plus kick returner, obviously key special teams player. And then Kyler Gordon, your young early 2nd-round pick from a season ago, who you're hoping can develop into a really good player as well. So not a terrible group, but again, you can see the NFC North a little bit more lacking on defense than what maybe they were on offense. Same thing at safety. Eddie Jackson from the Bears, Harrison Smith from the Vikings. Jackson's seen better days. Harrison Smith's seen a lot better days, but those are two really solid veteran safeties. I'm going Jaquan Brisker, the second-round pick for the Bears. And I'm actually taking Rudy Ford. There's not a lot of depth at this position in the division, and this is another player who, can he be my number 4 safety in a pinch? Yes. Can he also play really good special teams? Yes. So he just kind of made sense there. If you wanted to go Lewis Cine from the Vikings, first-round pick a season ago, who basically missed almost the entirety of the season due to injury, you could make a strong argument there. He'll be if you ever get him there, you could be a beast on special teams as well. But because he was injured the whole year, probably coming back from injury, I just took a little bit of a safer bet and went with the player that I know can be good on special teams in Rudy Ford. Kicker is really bad in the NFC North. There's really no good ones. I just went with Mason Crosby, to be honest. And I don't think there's an argument to be made that anyone else should be kept over Mason Crosby, which is kind of crazy. Ryan Wright from the Vikings at punter, and Andrew DePola, the long snapper from the Vikings. So I'll run through it one more time, just really quick without as much detail. Quarterbacks, Rodgers, Cousins, and Fields. Running back, Delvin Cook, Aaron Jones, and DeAndre Swift. Wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Christian Watson, Darnell Mooney, Jameson Williams, and Alan Lazard. Tight end, TJ Hawkinson, Mercedes Lewis, and Cole Kmet. Offensive tackles, David Bakhtiari, Christian Darrisaw, Penei Sewell, Brian O'Neill, Braxton Jones, and Zach Tom. Guard, Tevin Jenkins, Ezra Cleveland, Elton Jenkins, and Jonah Jackson. Center, Frank Ragnow. Defensive line, Kenny Clark, Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips, and Devontae Wyatt. Edge, Zadarius Smith, Daniil Hunter, Rashawn Gary, Aiden Hutchinson, and James Houston. Linebackers, Eric Kendricks, Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker, Malcolm Rodriguez, and Jack Sanborn. Corners, Jair Alexander, Jalen Johnson, Patrick Peterson, Rasul Douglas, Keyshawn Nixon, and Kyler Gordon. Safety, Eddie Jackson, Harrison Smith, Jaquan Brisker, and Rudy Ford. Kicker, Crosby. Punter, Ryan Wright. Long snapper, Andrew DePola. Your final tallies, your final totals. Green Bay Packers had 18 players. The Minnesota Vikings had 16. The Bears had 10. And the Lions had 9. Certainly some very good fringe players on the list. Jamal Williams. You can argue Jared Goff. Adam Thielen, Chase Claypool, Taylor Decker, and, even like an Eric Stokes, you could get in that argument. Hicks from the Vikings at inside linebacker. There's definitely players that you can argue in a variety of different ways. But if I had to build my best 53 that I think would be, your best bet moving forward, these are the 53 that I'm going to take. That's going to do it for me today. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll be right back here tomorrow to preview the Super Bowl, maybe go over a couple random topics as well. So make sure to check that out. Subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.